Our keynote speaker today is a highly regarded expert on this subject. He is sure to challenge our thinking and help us move forward together. Dr. Pedro Noguera's research focuses on the ways in which schools are influenced by social and economic conditions and the factors that obstruct and promote student achievement. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pedro Noguera.
Good morning. I would first thank Governor Sandoval and thank all of you for inviting me, and say it's an honor to be here with you. And I'm sorry I wasn't here for the other days. It sounded like you had a packed agenda full of very interesting perspectives on education. I hope to continue in that vein and hopefully also maybe challenge you to your thinking on some of the work we're doing. If it was up to me, education would be a nonpartisan issue. I really believe that part of what's wrong today is the politics of education. It's become too polarized, too contentious, and consequently, we are not solving the problems that really are going to have a tremendous impact on our nation's future. And so if there's anything that this organization can do to reduce some of the rancor and move us in a more constructive direction, I think that would be a huge step forward. So I really want to encourage you to think about how to make that happen in your states and how this organization could play a role in that nationally. I want to start, though, by pointing out what I think is increasingly obvious, and that is that despite the work we've been doing to reform schools, particularly over the last 15 years, the evidence shows that our schools are not getting sufficiently better. And that's the international evidence. That is that when you look at the data, the OECD data, the PISA data, and you compare how the United States is doing to other nations, particularly other nations that were once far behind us, you see that we continue to fall further and further behind. Now, I don't want to discount the progress we've made in certain places, particularly in raising graduation rates and expanding access to pre-K. I think those are all positive steps. However, I would say that we need to do much more if we're going to ensure that our children have a place in the world and are able to secure a future for themselves and get good jobs and support all of us as we enter our retirement and need more well-paid employees to keep Social Security going. So there's a need for a different approach, and I'm going to speak about that today because I would say that what the evidence shows right now is that rather than our schools breaking the cycle of poverty, expanding opportunity, our schools are implicated in the reproduction of inequality over generations. And I say this not again about political beliefs, this is about data. Look at the evidence in your state and your districts and ask yourself now, to what degree are the backgrounds of our kids driving the outcomes? Right? And where are you finding schools where that's not the case? The latter question is important because that, in fact, will point to what we should be doing more of. Right? And I'm going to just get to that in a moment. But right now, the overwhelming evidence shows that rather than using education to expand equity and create a more equitable society, education is doing the opposite. In many of our states and many of our districts, if you know the race and socioeconomic status of a school or of a district, you can predict almost how well they'll do. The ETS, the Educational Testing Service, is known for many years now. Strongest predictor for how well a child will do in school is family income. And family income combined with parental education, particularly the education of the mother, continues to be the strongest predictor of academic outcomes, of college enrollment. A study released just a few weeks ago showed that even for high-achieving poor kids of color, the graduation rates from college are lower than for upper-middle-class kids with lower achievement. Right. Why? Because money matters. And because the resources that a family has always help a child to access all the supports we know as parents are so vital to a student's success. like whether or not you have access to summer camp, whether or not you have access to a tutor if you need it, whether or not there's a computer in the home. Those inputs, those investments that families make in their children have tremendous impacts on outcomes. The question we have to ask ourselves is, to what degree can our schools compensate for what families can't provide? That ultimately is how we make the American dream accessible. I'd encourage you, all of you, if you haven't read it already, to read a book by Robert Putnam, the political scientist from Harvard University, just written a book called Our Kids. He starts by describing a visit back to the community where he grew up in Clinton, Ohio. A community that, when he was growing up over 50 years ago, sent over 80% of the kids to college, working class kids whose families had not gone to college. At that time, the American dream was within reach, it was real. He goes back to Clinton today, and what does he find? A town completely divided by race and class, where those families with the nice homes adjacent to the lake are doing fine, are on the path to success. The families on the other side of the tracks, mired in poverty and trapped and stuck there. Now, he and I are part of a group that's trying to look at what do we do to make that dream, to resuscitate that dream. Because we know that education is vital to making sure that young people are not stuck. But I would say that the kind of education we're providing right now is not getting us where we need to be. And again, this is what the data shows. And we have to ask, what's wrong? It's not simply a question of money. I can name several districts right now across the country that are spending high levels on per pupil spending, that have invested considerable resources on technology, where teacher salaries are high and outcomes for kids are still low. It's not simply about money, it's about how money's used, but even more, it's about the vision driving educational success. Right now, there's a competition in America between what I would call a narrow approach to education and a broad approach. I'm an advocate of the broad approach. But the narrow approach is one that you're all familiar with now. The narrow approach calls for us to use pressure to foster accountability. We have this idea that if we simply pressure schools, if we pressure teachers, if we threaten them with closure, if we threaten the kids, that somehow that will lead to greater results. I see very little evidence that this strategy works. In fact, what I'm seeing as schools are pressured, that those who can leave and get out. And the schools are left in turn with those who aren't able to escape. Closing schools is never going to be a strategy that will get us out of the situation we're in. In addition to the pressure, we also see a very narrow focus on achievement. Narrow in the sense that we're only looking at student test scores and overlooking all the other things that we know matter. In New York City and in New York State, we have large numbers of kids right now who are passing the state exams and have to take remedial courses when they get into college. This pattern is found throughout the country today because the tests are not good predictors for college readiness. And raising the bar on the testing requirements is not enough. Our kids are not getting the chance to write, to read, to do research, to do the kinds of things that we know lead to success in college. The narrow focus on test preparation is not only boring our kids and alienating them from school, it is driving many of our best teachers out of the profession. A scripted curriculum will never lead to highly engaged students who are empowered as learners. Third, we're using test scores to rank kids, to rank teachers, to rank schools. I would say this is not the most effective use of testing. Right now in most states, we test the kids in the spring, we give the teachers the results in the fall, when they no longer have the kids. That'd be a little like you going to your doctor for your annual physical. You get all the work done, and he says, come back in 6 months, I'll let you know how you're doing. Not a good idea if you're walking around with some major illness. Ranking kids is not the best way to help them. We should be using assessment to diagnose, to intervene, to monitor, and to provide the support that's needed to address the needs of our kids. We are holding principals accountable. And under Race for the Top, we're also threatening them with their jobs. Any of you who are in rural states know the inadequacy of this approach. Where are the highly effective principals in the wings waiting for their chance? You fire the principal in a rural town, you've got no one to step in. We need a different approach that gets the people in our schools to be better at what they do and that creates a whole new line of people that are ready to fill in over time. Under the narrow approach, we treat parents as consumers. You know what the research shows? Read the research of James Coleman, who studied the difference between parochial schools and public schools of similar demographics. Why do parochial schools get better results? Because of trust. Parents aren't treated as consumers, they're treated as partners. Lastly, we treat discipline in a very punitive manner in our schools, which is one of the reasons why in many schools, the discipline gap and the achievement gap are mirror images of the same phenomena. Which kids do we punish the most? The kids with the greatest needs. How do we punish them? By denying them learning time. Not a very effective way if you're interested in making sure and correcting behavior, because the goal of discipline must always be to change behavior, not merely to punish. The clearest evidence that it doesn't work is the fact that in most of our schools, we are punishing the same kids over and over again. And in too many of our schools, there is indeed a school-to-prison pipeline, because the kids we're punishing are often out of school, unsupervised, where they then get into trouble, and often do. We need a different strategy. Lastly, we are encouraging competition among schools. And as I will show in a moment, what we need is collaboration. What we need is sharing of best practices and best ideas. Not a competition, but a way of engendering a sense of common purpose, common mission in the education of our children. The broad approach that I've been advocating, and several others for a while, focuses on using assessment to diagnose learning needs, focuses on developing the skills of teachers continuously. You know, I've been teaching at some of the leading universities in the country, and I'll tell you this, we don't graduate master teachers. If you become a master teacher, you become a master teacher on the job. We need to get better at helping teachers to acquire skills that enable them to be successful with the children they serve. We need to focus on the whole child, which means nutrition, health, art, science, music, all the things that we know are essential for child development. Right? Jim Comer, who I know is here and who you heard from earlier, I was on a panel with him a few years ago, and he was asked by someone in the audience, he said, what do you think teachers are not getting enough of today? And he said, they're not getting enough on child development. We are focusing narrowly on achievement and ignoring development. And what we know is that when you ignore the other needs of children, right? Abraham Maslow called it the hierarchy of human needs. The kids with the greatest needs will always be the kids who are left behind. So we need to make sure that in our pursuit of higher, better outcomes, we don't lose sight of the fact, obviously, hungry kids don't do so well in school. How many of you in schools in states where there are hungry kids on a regular basis? I was in Michigan just a few months ago, and I met principals who told me that on Fridays, they were sending extra food home with children because many of those kids were not guaranteed a meal over the weekend. We need a different strategy that acknowledges that intellectual development, emotional, psychological, physical development are all occurring simultaneously, and all need to be nurtured. My colleague Howard Gardner at Harvard University points out to people, it was common in this country for many years for every kindergarten classroom to have a piano, and for every kindergarten teacher to know how to play it. Because back then we knew music was a foundation for learning. It still is, isn't it? Why are the pianos gone? Why is music treated like an expendable part of the budget? How many of you have met kids that have memorized the lyrics to hundreds of songs? Anybody? Right. What does that tell you about their capacity to retain information if they want to? Let's give them the music. Let's give them the art. Let's give them that enriched learning environment, not one that focuses narrowly on test preparation. We need to focus on all stakeholders being accountable: students, parents, teachers, principal, state legislators, superintendents, governors. Sorry, governor. They got to be accountable too. Everybody's got to be accountable for what we bring. Right now, we have a system that holds those with the least power most accountable. It doesn't work. It doesn't work when those who control the purse strings aren't providing the resources or are devising policies that are too narrowly conscripted to enable teachers and educators to do their work. We need to develop systems of mutual accountability where it's clear what each party must do to support outcomes for kids. We need to use discipline to foster character, to reinforce the morals and values that we know are essential for citizenship in society. Lawrence Kohlberg said the goal of discipline is not to teach kids to avoid punishment, it's to teach kids to do what's right even when we're not looking. Which means that we've got to focus on character development in kids. And we've got to make sure that they stay connected to learning, because the hardest kids to discipline are the kids who've given up. Lastly, we've got to expand learning opportunities for kids. There is an 8,000-hour gap between middle-class kids and poor kids in learning time in America today. Ask yourself now, what are your middle-class kids doing this summer? And what are your low-income kids doing? Right? And you'll see the difference there, and it matters. It matters in terms of school readiness. It matters in terms of overall development. We need to address that part of the gap. And lastly, we need to make sure that rather than fostering competition, we are indeed collaborating among schools. And so I want to make sure, I want to challenge the way we're using data right now. And I'm a person that uses data and understands the importance of research to guide what we do. Evidence matters. But as you know, a number of people could attribute this quote to Einstein, but it's actually Cameron, a physicist from England, who said, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Right? It may not raise test scores to give kids art and music, but I say give it to them anyway. Throw in lunch too, right? And recess, and phys ed, and maybe even a hug, because some of our kids aren't getting nearly enough hugs. Our kids need a well-rounded education that includes social and emotional support. And the kids who get the least of that will almost always be the kids who do the least well. This means that we've got to challenge what I call the normalization of failure, the deep complacency that's set into too many schools and too many communities where we've come to accept the fact that certain kids, based on their backgrounds, can't achieve. I'll show you in a moment, under the right conditions, all kinds of kids can achieve. Recent immigrants, English language learners, homeless kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids. I can name the school right now where those kids are being served well. And the existence of those schools is the proof that the problem is not the children. I'll say that one more time. The problem is not the children. The problem is the way we treat the children. The problem is that too often the children do not have high expectations and high supports. The problem is that too often we're not attentive to the learning environment and asking whether or not that environment is conducive to good teaching and learning. We're focused on the wrong things. And I would say that if we can shift the focus and begin to challenge the beliefs and the complacency and the rationalizations that lead to blaming kids and blaming parents, we can start to see schools and districts improve. There's good research that's come out of the University of Chicago. It's analyzed 10 years of school reform efforts. And the Chicago Consortium there identified 5 essential ingredients for sustained improvement. I want you to take a look at that list and ask yourself now, how are my schools in my state and my districts doing on these 5? Because none of this should surprise us. What the research shows is that schools that have a coherent instructional guidance system, that means that teachers aren't doing their own thing, there's actually a clear strategy with a curriculum, with benchmarks, with goals. Secondly, there's ongoing attention to develop the professional capacity of our teachers so that the skills of the teachers match the needs of the kids. Third, there's strong parent and community ties, because over 50% of student achievement is influenced by what parents do. And if you don't have a strategy for getting your parents invested as partners, you don't have a strategy. Fourth, the culture, the learning climate. Is that conducive to strong, healthy, positive relationships? Is the morale of teachers high? I've never been to a high-performing schools where the morale of teachers is low. I've never been to a high-performing school where teachers don't work hard. And working hard is not about the contract. It's about the environment. It's about the shared sense of mission. Culture matters, but cultures can't be imposed on schools. Cultures have to develop around a common mission and around that last point, shared leadership. Shared leadership, because this is not about heroic principals and heroic superintendents doing this all by themselves. It's about buy-in. It's about a common vision. What the research shows is that when these 5 ingredients are aligned, when they're all present, schools improve, make sustained improvement, even schools serving very poor kids. Now, my question is, why isn't this part of Race to the Top? Why isn't this the framework for Race to the Top? Why isn't this what, when we go into a school that's failing, why don't we look at these 5 and say, where do they stand on these 5? What do you need to focus on? This is research-based, unlike some of the things we're doing right now. And I would say that if we focused on these, we would give greater clarity to the kind of work that we need to do to change outcomes. What we need is a broader vision. A vision that keeps teaching and learning at the center, but also recognizes that extending learning opportunities matter, that safety matters, that mentorship for kids who don't have adult support at home is critical, that health and nutrition are important. All those things are part of the plan. We can't focus narrowly on achievement alone and expect to see better results. And the schools that are getting better results aren't doing that. So, a few things we've got to keep in mind. First and foremost, poverty is not a learning disability. There is absolutely no evidence that poor kids can't learn. However, when we ignore the needs of children who are poor, when we know that kid has no coat in the winter, he may miss school some days. When we know the kid is hungry, or the kid might need eyeglasses and therefore have trouble reading, in those cases, poverty can become disabling. We also know that education can play a role in breaking the cycle of poverty if it empowers young people as learners. What does that mean? Well, I'm living proof of it. I bet you there are others in this room who are living proof. How many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from college? Raise your hand. Look around the room. How many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from high school? Anybody? A couple. Me too. Neither of my parents graduated high school. They sent all 6 of us to college, some of the top colleges in the country. I come from Brownsville, Brooklyn, a part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified. Better known for producing rappers like Biggie Small and boxers like Mike Tyson. How do you manage to get from the projects to become a professor at NYU with an endowed chair? You do it because your parents reinforce the importance of education, and you do it because when you're put into a special ed class, as I was, because my teachers assumed that I couldn't speak English because of my Spanish surname. And this happens in many states where we are placing kids who we see as English language learners in special education. My father had the nerve to come up to the school and question the placement and insist that my brother and I be retested. And lo and behold, instead of being in need of special education, they said we were gifted. My older brother ended up at Harvard, I ended up at Brown. We are living proof that your background need not drive the outcomes. And there are other kids all around the country that are showing us that over and over again. The question is, how do we get that to happen on a larger scale in a greater number of schools? And for that to happen, I would say we've got to empower our kids as learners. What does that mean? It means an enriched curriculum that too many of our kids, particularly our poor kids, are not getting today. I was at a school also in Brooklyn, in Brownsville, recently, a middle school, saw some boys reading a passage from A Call to the Wild, Call of the Wild by Jack London, book I loved as a kid. I asked them, how do you like the story? One of them said he liked the story, but he wanted to know what happens next. And I looked, they'd only been given a page and a half. And I asked the teacher, why just a page and a half? She said, well, that's the way it's going to appear on the test. How many of you take a page and a half to the beach this summer to go read? I became an avid reader because my parents, my mother particularly, forced us to go to the libraries on Saturdays. And I was lucky to be greeted by a librarian who was there, who could pick out books that she knew would interest us and tap into that desire to read. You want our kids to become readers, we've got to give them good things to read, whole books. You want our kids to be writers, that we've got to give them the opportunity to write more and more. You want our kids to be problem solvers, you've got to show them how what they're learning in school can be applied in the real world. And again, there are schools that are showing us how to do this now. Here's an example. Bronx School Academy for Language and Technology, a school serving very poor kids, some of the most vulnerable kids in New York City. These are students with interrupted formal education. That means they were not literate in their native language, Spanish, when they came to this country, usually at 15 or more. But they're in a school where 95% of them will graduate, have been graduating for the last 10 years, with 6 or more regents passed. That's the state exam. That's in different content areas, including English. When I talk to the kids about why is this school so successful, over and over again, you know what they said to me? Because it feels like a family. Because we feel supported, we feel cared for, we feel encouraged. I talked to the teachers. I said, how do you get such good results in a school where a third of the teachers are new? They said, because no lesson is delivered to a student unless it's been planned with other teachers and vetted by other teachers before it's given in the classroom. And I watched as they planned lessons together, and I asked one of the teachers, I said, you do this every day? And he said, yes. He said, don't all teachers? I said, sadly, no. Sadly, because too often, what are we doing in our schools? We are assigning our least prepared, least effective teachers to work with our neediest kids. Show me the research to support that strategy. This school, 30% of the kids are undocumented. And because in New York State, we don't have a DREAM Act, at least not yet, there's a plan to make sure they have technical skills so that they won't be stuck permanently in low-wage jobs. Because they know these kids are ultimately here to work, to support themselves and their families, and they want to make sure they have access to that dream too. Here's yet another example. Comes from Los Angeles. Hollenbeck Middle School. This is a 90-minute math class. Take a look at the picture. And the kids are up out of their seats, aren't they? And the teacher is so good, she can stand in the back and talk to me. Why? Because the kids are in control. The kids know exactly what to do. The kids are learning from each other, which means they're not only learning the math, they're learning how to collaborate, they're learning how to listen, they're learning the social and emotional skills that we know are so critical for success in life. This was a 90-minute math class. When the bell rang, the kids were disturbed because they were so immersed in the work. And because they're so immersed in the work, guess what? Discipline is not a problem. Because the best form of classroom management is deep academic engagement. This class is ready for the Common Core. They're doing it. And they're not fighting about it because they're already ready for higher order thinking. They're ready. And all of these kids are recent immigrants. All of these kids are poor. All of these kids are English language learners. If you can do this at Hollenbeck Middle School in East LA, I say you could do this anywhere in America today. Now, it turns out that my son's in that picture too. He's a tutor on the right from City Year. And he's the one who told me about this teacher. And I told him after, I said, Antonio, that was such an impressive class. He said, well, she's good, but she's not the best teacher. I said, who's the best? He said, I'll show you. I said, how do you know? He said, the kids all tell me. He said, they cut class to get in this guy's class. And I go in this class, and the teacher's got a drum set at the front of the room. I said, what's going on here? He said, just watch. And throughout the class, he's using rhythm and rhyme to engage his kids. He's got them writing. He's got them debating. He's doing all the higher order work, and he is also teaching these kids how to have total command over the English language. If you can do that in East LA, you can do that anywhere in America today. And so again, we've got to learn from the examples that are showing us how it's done. In these schools, we see teachers focused on learning outcomes. They're not waiting for the test to be given. They're looking at the student work, and they're analyzing the work and asking which kids are making the progress, which ones aren't, who needs help, who needs to be retaught. And retaught doesn't mean taught louder. Right? It means a different strategy, a different approach this time. Which ones need additional help? Because they also get it. Early intervention is so much more effective than late intervention, which is what we're doing in most places. And because they're focused on evidence and modeling for kids what their expectations are, they also treat every submission from a student as the first draft. Wow. Think about that. How many of you do your best work on the first draft? I don't. I revise, because it's in the revisions that the real learning occurs, not the first submission. And it's in the feedback that the real teaching occurs, not in the grading. If we focus on getting our kids to be clear on what we're looking for and what excellent work really looks like, not only will we help them produce higher quality work, we'll also teach them that quality that many people say is so important now: grit, right? Persistence, perseverance, not giving up when it's hard. Well, these schools have figured out how to do that, and they're doing it by giving them many, many times to rework, to revise, rather than for treating the work at the same time, the first submission, as the end product. They're also focusing on the broader needs of kids, right? And they're building partnerships with organizations so that the school doesn't have to do it all on our own. We can't ask our teachers to be social workers and psychologists and police officers. They can't do it. They don't have the skills. They're overwhelmed. We need to bring in social workers and nurses and psychologists and people who are skilled to meet the needs of the kids. And where this is occurring, we're getting extraordinary results. Here's a school that's getting those kind of results. PS 28 in Bedford-Stuyvesant. New York City, we have very fancy names for our schools. And PS 28 is one of those fancy schools. I was invited by the principal there, Sadie Silva, who kept saying, "Pedro, I want you to visit my school." And it took me a while to get out there, and I get out there one day, and first thing she does, she introduced me to her secretary. She says, "This is the person who does all the administrative work." I couldn't run the school without her. I said, "Well, then if she does the administrative work, what do you do?" She said, "I'm the lead teacher. I didn't become a principal to escape the classroom." She said, "Come on, let's visit some classrooms." And we go into classrooms, and every classroom I enter has 4 or 5 adults. I said, "Where are you getting all these teachers from?" She said, "Well, they're not all teachers." She said, "All our special ed teachers are in the classroom with the teachers because 28% of our kids are on IEPs. Right? So we have a push-in model, and the kids can't tell who's the special ed teacher from who's the regular teacher because they work seamlessly together." I said, "Well, then who are the others?" She said, "Those are parents we've trained to work with teachers." I said, "Do they get paid?" She said, "They don't get paid. We don't have any money to pay them. They volunteer, but we train them and they assist the teachers. Some of them make copies, some of them simply help out in any way." I see one parent standing very close to a little boy. I said, "Why is she so close to that boy?" She said, "Because he has trouble sitting still, and we're so glad she's here." She explains that this is a school that runs through a series of partnerships. They have a partnership with Downstate Medical School, which provides immunizations and eye exams and hearing exams on site. It's a full-service operation. She has yet another partnership with the YMCA. They provide the second shift. They come to the school to do after-school supports for kids. This is a school where over 30% of the kids are homeless. So she keeps it open to 6 o'clock every night. She doesn't want the kids out in the streets in the cold. She has parent education classes going on, job training for parents, GED classes for parents. She believes that if parents are better educated and employed, they'll do a better job with the kids. She said, "Let me show you the professional development I have going on for my teachers today." I go into a room, there are 2 social workers working with a group of 8 teachers, and the teachers are posing questions to the social workers about the social and emotional needs of their children. One teacher says he's got a child who's aggressive, he's fighting. Another one's got a child who's depressed. Another one's got a child with attachment issues. He said, "He's attached to my leg, I can't teach." And in each case, the social workers are giving them, "Try this, come back tomorrow, let me know how it works." And I'm listening to this very practical but important conversation about the classroom dynamics. And I said, "What made you decide to offer this as a form of training for your teachers?" She said, "Well, until I did, too many of my kids were being referred for special education. And I realized that my teachers had to be more skilled if they were going to be successful in this school. She said, let me introduce you to my guidance counselor. And we head down the hall to meet a guidance counselor. She said, but before we get there, I have to warn you, I got him from the rubber room. Okay. Now, those of you who don't know New York, don't know, we had this place, used to call the rubber room, where they would send teachers and other employees there. They've been written up for some infraction. They could be there for years, collecting a salary, but not working in a school with children. I said, how do you know to get this man from the rubber room? She said, well, I don't know why he was there in the first place, but he had been my guidance counselor when I was in school. So he literally saved my life, so I knew he was good. So I asked for him, they said, you could have him. Right? And I get there, and he's there with the little boy. They're very casually talking, and I introduce myself, and I ask the little boy, why are you here today? He says, well, I'm here to learn how to be good. I said, is it working? He said, I hope so, because I'm tired of getting put out of class. And then they explained to me that the school has a no suspension policy. They don't believe sending kids home to watch television is an effective form of discipline. They actually focus on getting at the roots of the problem and changing the behavior. So I'm getting ready to leave. I say, Sadie, I'm going to have to tell the chancellor about what I've seen here because your school is amazing. She said, well, before you do, come into my office. I got to show you one more thing. And our office is set up like a classroom with a big table and chairs. I said, what do you do here? She said, I'm working with the kids that the teachers have trouble with. I'm the lead teacher, remember? And she shows me then the portfolios of every student with samples of their work and the data system that allows them to monitor every student, because every student at the school has a learning plan. Every student, nothing is left to chance. It's all very focused. So I write to the chancellor. I tell him about what I've seen. And to his credit, he comes to the school 2 days later to visit. He's also impressed. And he writes about it too. Sends out a memo to every principal in New York City. That's 1,800 principals, describing what he's seen, except the only thing he mentions in that memo is the data system, because he was so happy to see someone using it in New York City to spend $100 million on that data system. And I said, well, Chancellor, I'm glad you visited, but you missed it, because it's not just a data system that makes that school work. It's all those things that come together that allow it to get those kinds of results. That's what we've got to be conscious of. It's more than just a narrow focus on achievement. Achievement's got to be at the center, but we've got to focus on other things as well. Okay. Here's another example. Brockton High School in Massachusetts. Anybody here from Massachusetts today? Okay, the Massachusetts will know it. Brockton High School's been shown it's one of the few urban high schools in the state that gets a level 1 rating. A few years back, they decided the only way to get their kids ready for the MCAS was to focus on literacy. A few veteran teachers got together, went to the principal and said, we've got to make sure that our kids can read and write at grade level. They got to read and write content, because the MCAS is the most rigorous exam offered in the country today. And Sue comes back to him and says, look, it's a great idea, but I can't make them do it. Teachers say, let's work with the willing. She said, well, good idea, but I can't pay them. She said, we'll do it on our own time. And so on their own time, over an extended period of time, they train their colleagues on how to teach literacy and content. And lo and behold, the scores go up consistently. For the last 4 years in a row, 1/3 of the senior class has gotten the highest possible score in the state, which qualifies them for a scholarship to any public university. And if you could look at the demographics, you would see 1/3 African American, 1/3 Hispanic, 1/3 low-income white. It matches the demographics of the school. Brockton is the largest school in the state of Massachusetts. It's not an outlier. If you could do it there, you can do it many, many more places. So let me close so we can leave some time for questions. I would say right now we've got to shift the questions we're asking of our schools. Instead of telling our teachers to raise achievement, we should be saying, get your kids excited about learning. Think about the difference in the two messages. If you focus on achievement, you focus on test preparation. If you focus on getting kids excited about learning, you focus on what I saw at a Bronx classroom this January, where kids on one of the coldest days of the year were bundling up to go outside to study the Bronx River. And they bring back samples from the river to tell me what pollutants are in the river, what plant life, what animal life is in the river, and they're monitoring it over the time. I asked the teacher, why are you doing this? She says, it's not good enough to read about it in a book. I got to make the curriculum come to life for these kids. So we've also got to ask ourselves, not just how do we hold teachers accountable, how do we get everybody accountable for this mission? Everybody, parents, teachers, students, politicians. And lastly, how do we create schools where the backgrounds of our kids don't drive the outcomes? I'm not going to pretend this is ever going to be easy, but I am going to say this: it's being done right now. If we would learn from the places where it's being done, we would approach the work differently. We have ample reason to do so right now. The future of this country will be determined by what happens in our nation's schools. It's that important for our future. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I rushed through that. But there is time for some questions, so floor is open. Yes, right here in the blue. Lady in the blue. I don't know if there's a microphone.
Yes, Catherine, hi, thank you. I'm Catherine Dodge in New Hampshire. Thank you for your reference to data and the importance of data. We have this data explosion, everyone's using it to measure success. How do we include contextual issues and measurements so that that can be included in the way we measure success as we move forward in these critical areas?
Good question, and I think it's an important question. And the American Institute of School Research in Washington has been asking the same question. My colleague there, David Osher, has been saying we need to focus more than just the achievement data to look at some of the demographic data, the community data that also can inform, because that gives us a clearer sense of the student needs. Because here's the critical piece here. The needs of the kids have to be matched by the skills and the resources of the teachers in the schools. If you don't have that match, that alignment, then the kids with the greatest needs will continue to slip through the cracks. So you're absolutely right. We need the right data, and then we need to ask the right questions about the data. Again, it's not simply about monitoring and measuring. It's about understanding, given the data, how do we intervene? And how do we intervene early to prevent? You know, when you see kids getting into high school with a 3rd or 4th grade reading level, what does that tell you? They've been pushed along all the way. People saw that and did not intervene. So we need the data, but we need to make sure we're asking the right questions. AISR. I might be getting the acronym wrong. Yes.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is James Ford. I'm the state teacher of the year from North Carolina.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I have the pleasure of teaching at a school that looks very demographically the same as all the schools you've mentioned. And I've spoken with legislators all throughout the year trying to create that sense of shared accountability. How do you build the will to close the achievement gap when in conversations so often what I hear is, well, you know, it all starts at home. And, you know, that just kind of feels like a code for, you know, it can't be done. But how do you build the will to kind of change that lens around the achievement gap?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I would say it does, in part, start at home. I've spoken to that, but it can't stop there because, as we know, many of our families are struggling and don't have the resources, the time, the education to adequately support their kids. That's why schools are so important, especially for those children. And so, again, we do this in other fields. You know, we do this in business. We certainly do it in sports. In sports, we look at where we're getting success, and then we say, okay, how'd they do it? Let's get an assistant coach from that team and bring them over here, right, so that we can improve. We don't do that in education. Even when we see examples. I spoke at a graduation last week of a brand new high school in Manhattan. It's a school for, it's the Gateway School for Technology. 80% of the students are young men of color. Now, in a city where graduation rates are less than 40% for those young men, 95% of them are graduating and going to college. I would say everybody should be trying to go to that school and figure out what they're doing, because they got a formula that's working. And that's what we need to do a lot more of. Those schools are not blaming families. They're focused on different kinds of work. They're really focused on how to build the relationships that can drive outcomes for success. Another hand over here. We got the runners running.
Yes, I'm Mohsen Ghaffari, Teacher of the Year from Utah. You started your conversation by saying that you said something about politics. What can we do to take the politics out of education?
I wish I had the answer to that one. I really do, because I think that's the really sad part. Is it's become so politicized that in a lot of I was just in New Orleans. Okay, I was in New Orleans a week ago, and it was analyzing what's happened 10 years after Katrina. How are schools doing? And the data shows achievement's gone up, but there are other questions that the data doesn't answer. Right, which is about parental satisfaction, which is about the number of kids that have been pushed out of schools. And we should, what troubled me is that instead of being able to have an objective discussion about where New Orleans is and what it takes to ensure that those schools will be an anchor for that community in the years ahead, it was mired in this kind of very polarized discussion about which approach is better. I think, we need to I don't know where that comes from. I think leaders, my hope, could start to set a different tone. There aren't too many leaders that I see with the vision to do that, right? To bring different stakeholders to the table to talk. I mean, for example, this battle about charter schools. I can name several charter schools that are outstanding. Now, I was a charter authorizer for New York State. I can also name several that are not, right? But we need to learn from the ones that work and then ask, why do they work? And then what can we take from those examples and make available to public schools? That's not happening because we're focused on a competition instead. And that competition is not in our interest.
I was wondering, is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering if in any of the schools that you found great achievement, that they engage the students in running the school, making meaningful decisions at the school level, even setting their own standards.
There are a number of schools now that are doing that. There's a school in, I live in New York, or at least I have lived. I'm about to move to Los Angeles, but there's a school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, Excellence for Boys, a charter school. Every Friday, there's a town hall meeting run by the students, and they discuss issues of importance to the school or to the broader community. And it's an exercise in leadership, but it's also an exercise in shared governance. Right? We want our kids to become responsible citizens, then let's prepare them while they're in school for understanding the complexity of the issues. And it's so impressive to see. Now, I would also add that at Excellence for Boys, every boy at that school learns to play violin. Right? And it's interesting to watch because when you're learning, I don't know how many violinists are in the audience today, but I got a violinist over there. They have to work on posture, they have to work on breathing, they have to work on concentration. And what the school's found is that not only does that help them in violin, it helps them in classroom, it helps them outside the classroom. And what's more, it challenges the stereotypes about what young men from Bed-Stuy can do. So yes, to leadership and governance, but also challenge the stereotypes that otherwise undermine our children. I think it's one way over there.
Hi, my name is Ray Rosamondo from Connecticut. And it seems that even those who recognize the folly of using test scores as to narrowly focused determinants of success, even use those to say this school is successful, this school is successful, because we tend to go back to looking at test scores, and it seems like that's all we got. Can you talk about other outcomes that states can incorporate in their school accountability measures and turnaround and categorization of schools under ESEA that can change that discussion to the real things that we need our schools to produce in terms of student achievement and student outcomes?
Certainly, and I'll use this as a way to plug a new book by a colleague, Linda Darling-Hammond, on performance assessment. And there are a small number of schools around the country that have been doing performance assessment for a while now. That is that rather than relying simply on test scores, and I don't want to argue here, this is not an argument against testing or assessment. We have to assess to know how well kids are doing. But they're doing assessment differently. They're actually looking at the work kids produce. And they are doing what I described before, revise, resubmit. And what the research is showing, these schools have much higher rates of college readiness, and kids are more likely to persist in college beyond the first year. So there are alternatives that broaden what we know about a student and their performance beyond how well they do on a standardized test. You know, one of the things I often do when I go to schools, I ask the kids, how hard do you work on these tests? Right? You know, because the assumption is that the test is an accurate representation of their ability. I would say for many of these kids, it's not. Many of the kids don't take the test nearly as that seriously, especially if recess is after, or you know, they have a headache that day. You know, and so we need to look at performance in a broader way, right? Beyond just, not to say that we don't test, but we need to look at work. We need to analyze the work. You know, a lot of people say they don't like trusting teachers. Guess what? You have no choice. You got to trust the teachers. They're the only ones in the classroom. Most of the time, the power's in their hands. I knew as a brand new teacher, when I was teaching in Providence, Rhode Island, as soon as they closed the door, I was in charge. I thought, wow, they put a 19-year-old in charge. But what we really need to do is to give our teachers the tools to focus on the evidence of learning. And the most important evidence is the learning that's occurring every day, not simply what they do on a standardized test once a year. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you all.